for fat loss, what are the top two things that you would tell people to do that maybe besides strength training?
People create a lot of friction, and I think that they do a lot of things that makes them feel like they're productive. If you're trying to alter your blood glucose regulation on a daily basis, that doesn't matter at all. What matters is calories in, calories out. And
People don't like to hear that.
they don't like to hear that. No, the food that you eat is going to be the major lever that manipulates fat loss.
Right.
Cardio then buffers that.
You are a very strong person. What would you say the top two things that you can you talk about if someone comes for fat loss? What are the top two things that you would tell people to do that maybe besides strength training? What would you say?
I'd still say strength training is the most important
I know,
thing.
same thing. Okay, damn. Okay.
But you have to, we've already talked about it.
What do you think about all these people constantly about the overuse of tracking?
I think a lot of tracking stuff isn't necessarily going to be very accurate. So let's say you're doing body fat testing. There is a ton of error built into every type of body fat testing metric. Plus, I'm also not really particularly concerned with what is your exact body fat in a moment in time. I care more about where you're trending. It's like the scale. People get really freaked out about the scale. It's actually very valuable information. Just don't weigh yourself once every 3 months. Weigh yourself on a very regular basis and just watch where it's going. You're going to get fluctuation, but look for the trend line. That's useful data, right? I think that's helpful. I think progress photos, same time of day, same lighting, same outfit, compared over time, you can really see changes. Those things are actually quite useful. I like that kind of tracking. I don't personally use any tracking devices. I think there's some really good ones. My friend Joel Jamieson has something called Morpheus, which is heart rate variability stuff. And I mean, I know Joel, I know his expertise. I do believe it's the best product on the market there. He was just on Peter Attia's podcast talking about it. So he's got credibility in that space. Some of the other measures of heart rate variability, which can see whether you're rested, recovered, and prepared.
I mean more things like the glucose monitoring, the sleep tracking, all these tracking.
Glucose monitoring daily is nonsense. It's complete nonsense. It's totally unnecessary. For a person who has generally active good metabolic health, the obsession with what's going on with your blood sugar on a transient daily basis, you're completely looking in the wrong direction. Yes, do we want to make sure that you have good blood work over time? Sure. But if you're trying to alter your blood glucose regulation on a daily basis, that doesn't matter at all. What matters is calories in, calories out. And
people don't like to hear that.
They don't like to hear that. No. So I think what happens is a lot of people are looking for complicated ways to feel like they're doing productive shit when it detracts from go get your ass in the gym, go lift weights, find a system and parameters that actually get you to eat the right amount of calories to your goals, get lots of protein in your diet, and stop complicating the process. I think people create a lot of friction, and I think that they do a lot of things that makes them feel like they're productive. That's distracting at best and interfering with doing useful things at worst.
I agree. Number one, exercise. Biggest bang for your buck, exercise.
So I sometimes challenge questions because I know people look for the simple answer, but it completely depends on someone's circumstance. I could say, here, go do this resistance-based routine, and the person doesn't have access to that particular routine or that space.
Let's say they have access.
So I think, again, it depends on how many times a week can they go to the gym. What do they like, right? So if I say go work out 4 times a week, would I love to see most people under optimal circumstances go lift weights for 4 1-hour workouts a week? I'd love that. If we can get a person to probably about 90 to 120 minutes of cardiovascular activity a week, I'd love that. What pace? You can vary it. I think you mix in a good volume. Zone 2 is now very popular. It's very trendy. People are talking about
Zone 2. People are saying Zone 2.
That's the thing, right? That's what's being branded around now. It's really just low intensity, steady state cardio. Why does that matter? Well, you can, on one hand, it's not as time efficient as HIIT training, but I mean, sometimes people have the time, but they don't have the recovery capacity. So if you have no time and a lot of recovery capacity, You go short bursts of high intensity stuff, interval based. You go hard, you rest, you go hard, you go rest. Maybe it's some sort of sprint interval on a treadmill. I like things like pushing sleds or kettlebell swings, metabolic type stuff when it comes to, it's still sort of resistance based. Or you can sit on a bike and you can go at different intervals on the bike. I like things like incline walking on treadmills. I like air bikes. All of those things work really well. And one of the big components is, for most people, we could tell them what's quote optimal, but if they don't like it and they won't do it, it doesn't work. So
Right.
the best answer is to find something that you at the very least like hate the least, right? And if you can find something like, here's a trick that I use. I don't like doing cardio. I find it boring. I'm distracted. I can't listen to a podcast. If I'm driving, cooking, I listen to podcasts. I love it. Like the habit stacking.
Yeah.
But what I figured out is I'll sit on a recumbent bike, the upright bikes, or I can walk on a treadmill. It works. And I read a book I'm interested in. And I feel very productive. There's a seduction of that. But I'm reading a book I'm interested in. I'm doing cardio, which I actually feel very good. And I go and I vary my intensity. Sometimes I crank up the resistance a bit and I keep it steady for a slightly shorter duration. And sometimes I'll sit on a little bit longer, a slightly lower intensity. And I can feel my heart rate's up, but I'm not like not out of breath. And I'm able to actually enjoy the book. And I actually have created this habit that I like and look forward to. And because I like it and look forward to, I'm willing to do it.
What is that? What's the habit? The reading of the book while you're on the
sitting and reading a book while I'm
Yeah.
sitting on a bike.
Right. So that is habit stacking,
Yeah.
right? Like there's like you're compounding the habit, so you actually will do the other thing.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. What do you think about like so you're saying for weight loss, strength training is by far the best thing. That you're still saying that, correct?
I still think fundamentally, if I
Okay.
were forced to say to someone, I mean, it's a false dichotomy, but hey, you can only do this one thing, I would still say to them, lift weights. And there's several things that are going to happen. Is you're getting someone from inactive to active. They are going to burn more calories than they were not doing anything. And what tends to happen is we start to see people like make better choices in their other lifestyle behaviors when they lift weights. They have better energy. It's going to have a major effect on your energy. It's going to have a major effect on your mood. If your mood improves, you're probably going to be more motivated to get
Right.
up and move
It's
around.
a ripple effect.
Total. Yep.
Basically, exercise is a ripple effect. But you can get that same thing from cardio.
Absolutely.
Like for me personally, like I don't get my endorphins are not as activated with strength training as they are with cardio. And cardio to me is that one catalyst that will propel everything else for me. I can do weights after that. I can do all the things because my brain now has been activated.
And I don't think most people should do strength training in isolation. I would really love, and I was the guy,
Yeah.
the guy who lifted weights. It's all about being
Yeah.
bulky. I don't need cardio. I believe that. I genuinely subscribe to that, but it was something, it was an identity preserving belief. And as I dug deeper and deeper into the science of strength conditioning, and as I got older, I'm realizing, no, I also need this conditioning component, this cardio component, and I feel better when I do it. And the old myth is that cardio will kill your gains. Nonsense. Unless you're doing extreme levels of high volume or high intensity cardio in the absence of resistance training, in the absence of consuming enough protein, and in calorie restriction.
That's a really good point. That's my concern because I love jogging on a treadmill for brain activation, for focus, and for like kind of just like getting like kind of kickstarting my day, right? That allows me to do all these other things that I would otherwise not want to do as much, right? That's like I said, that's like my like trigger, my catalyst. But then I get concerned because of the fact that like so much out there is about the fact that it's basically breaking down all your muscle mass and you're not getting the gains and you'll be flabby and you'll be skinny fat and all these things. So you're saying that is not true and it's a myth.
I think those are all like fear-based myths
Yeah.
that permeate. There are so many of them.
Right.
And again, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but it's not the sexy answer. It's lift weights to preserve the muscle, eat enough protein so that way you're building and maintaining muscle mass, which I find helps get the calories in range of what you need anyway. Because calories are going to be the food that you eat is going to be the major lever that manipulates fat loss.
Right.
Cardio then buffers that. And it's the old adage, like you can't out-train a bad diet. Technically you can, just depends on how bad your diet is and how extreme your training is, right? I don't recommend that approach for most people.
What about over-exercising? Can you have the opposite return? Like, can you actually have diminishing returns if you over-exercise?
Absolutely. Once you get into overexercising, you're probably also dealing with some sort of psychological shit that, like, I'm not an expert in this stuff, but like orthorexia, right? Just an obsession with,
Right.
and I'm probably going to use the wrong definition. I tend to think of it more as this concept of an over obsession with, like, quote, healthy living to the point it becomes unhealthy, but over emphasis on exercising, and it's more on the exercise side versus the dietary restriction side. But yes, you can really overdo it. You can do so much, both muscle damage by overdoing on resistance training. So this actually is a very important thing. If you in a very short, like let's say someone is brand new to exercising and they go jump in and they do 5 or 6 intense 1 hour, 1.5 hour workouts a week from having done nothing. They're totally deconditioned into very high intensity, a lot of training to failure. You can tip out past a point where you do so much muscle damage that you could elevate a metabolic waste product of muscle damage called creatine kinase, which is not to be confused with creatine, CK. And if your CK levels rise past a certain point, it can overwhelm your kidneys, which can cause, oversimplifying this, but it can cause organ failure, cascading organ failure. It's called rhabdomyolysis, and you can end up in the hospital for it. And not to demonize CrossFit, but rhabdomyolysis was actually pretty rare outside of like serious car accidents until CrossFit came around. And then because sometimes people were jumping in too much too heavily, like I said, not to demonize them, but
Oh,
it
yeah.
became more common. And you're having people dealing with rhabdomyolysis. And now I think there's a better understanding of it because it's kind of like NAFLD, non-fatty, like what is it? Non-alcohol fatty liver disease, right? And Peter Attia talks about this in his book. It's like that was not a thing until a recent generation. All of a sudden, we're starting to see this show up, and like now it's everywhere. Where you're seeing people who are in their 30s with significant liver damage who are not. It was not a result of alcohol. So it's kind of a more recent phenomenon because of the nature of the change of the world. So the acute risk of too much exercise could be something in extreme cases like rhabdomyolysis. On a more ongoing basis, well, you're just not recovering. So you're potentially like just doing more muscle damage and connective tissue damage over time than you're actually feeding, resting. You're just overdoing it to the point where you can actually have macro trauma that becomes micro trauma of your joint tissue and you start having joint injuries.
Yeah. I like that. Okay, Andrew, I think we're good. Can you tell people where to find you besides Andrew Coate on Instagram?
Andrew Coates Fitness on Instagram. It's the hub. My website, www.andrewcoatesfitness.com. Any articles that I get published on anything, I will share through both of those.